Uh, so a little bit about myself. I've been in data protection in the field for about 12 years now. It's really all I know. So if you come to me talking about malware, or SCADA, or all the other topics you're talking about, I don't know much about it because I've pretty much all I've done is data protection. I started as in consulting, doing professional services with a company called IntelliSecure. That was a Denver company. We were a data protection consulting company. It was first called BEW Global and then IntelliSecure. I worked there for six years. And then I've bounced around to a few vendors. I've been at Digital Guardian. I've been at Palo Alto Networks. I'm currently at a company called Cyberhaven. I'm a solution architect over there. I also created a DLP testing webpage called dlptest.com. Back in the days when I was doing installs, the reason I created the webpage was I got sick of logging into my personal Gmail every time I was doing a DLP install to see if the tool was working correctly. So I was like, I'm sick of that. I need a new way to test it. And I created that. And what do you know? It like took off. I get about 60,000 unique visitors every month, about 250,000 page views. So it's highly used in the industry. I really never thought it would go anywhere. It was literally my little pet project, but it did take off. So really, yeah, that's my expertise has really been around data protection. So what are we going to talk about today? So going to talk about data protection just at a high level, just, quick, what is it? Why should we care? Some tools. And then we're actually going to hop into some different channels that are of interest where I've seen a lot of movement, a lot of activity, a lot of innovation. We see the landscape changing. So we're going to talk about that. And then I'm also going to talk about data protection deployment and how we, went about that and how some things have changed in that space as well. So really just talking about data protection, really, we kind of go back to, some of the fundamentals of cybersecurity. And we talk about like confidentiality, integrity, availability. So it's kind of your three pillars are three areas that are, a lot of people start talking about when you talk about data protection. They'll say, the three pillars are, your ACI, and really, confidentiality is just making sure that only people that should have access to the data have the correct access. Integrity is making sure that the data is accurate and consistent. And then availability, just, it better be online. And availability has really changed a lot, especially with cloud. And we'll talk about cloud and the migration of data going from on-prem to cloud and SaaS, because what we'll talk about as we go through this slide in this presentation is it also led to a lot of new vulnerabilities and a lot of new risks. And then a lot of innovation took place in the data protection space. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is because of that. So really, when we talk about last thing, high level that I want to talk about is there's many different products that come into play. So when I look at data protection, it's more of a defense in depth. You're going to need multiple solutions in place to really say like, okay, I've got my data protection, in place and it's working well. Really, my expertise is the first one here. Data loss prevention has been a tool that's been around for quite a while, 15, 20 years now at this point. And that's been my expertise. When I was doing consulting work, I deployed a lot of Symantec DLP, McAfee, WebSense, there's now ForcePoint and RSA. I did about 250 of those installs of those different products throughout my time doing consulting. So that's, honestly, the vendors I'm with now, that's been our focus as well, is around DLP. So a lot of my presentation today is going to be around DLP, but I also want to highlight some of the other ones here as well, right? We also want to talk about encryption. Encryption is interesting now because, like I mentioned, a lot of from availability, when we started moving up to the cloud, well, encryption actually started being built in, right? When you go and you deploy now an S3 bucket or a blob storage in Azure or GCP, it's encrypted by default. You actually would have to tell them you don't want to encrypt your bucket when you deploy it now. It's just encrypted now is the default setting. So encryption is interesting. We used to do a lot of third-party tools with encryption, but now it's almost commoditized. It's almost built into the solutions and products that we're using, including like our laptops, right? Full disk encryption is it's just there. We don't have to tell our systems to encrypt anything anymore. It's just built in. There are still going to be encryption tools out there, right? If you got databases on-prem or specific on-prem elements, you're still going to see third-party encryption tools. I'm not going to focus on those. Some of the other ones, when we're talking about databases, data masking also comes in, obfuscation, right? If you're collecting credit card numbers, we all know you don't just keep a giant database of credit card numbers, right? You're going to want to obfuscate that. You want to have some sort of tokenization of that. Access control. Access control is interesting. It's a big one. And there's actually the first topic that I'll go into is data discovery. And it'll be interesting because access control at the beginning was all around, making sure that the correct users had the right permissions to the data on your file servers, right? That was like one of the biggest access controls at the beginning. It's really changed a lot since then, right? Now everything's moved over to cloud. Now you've got a bunch of different access controls that are all based in the cloud. And that could be in your cloud infrastructure. So AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, wherever you're hosting stuff, right? So they've got their own access controls, but then you have another layer of access controls with all these SaaS applications, right? SaaS applications, like think about Google Drive, Office 365. They have the ability to quickly share files out publicly, internally. So the access control is really spread. It's not just something that was so easy. It's now you've got to look at a giant landscape of where those controls have now migrated to. And the last one is data backup. And backup is one of those, I've never really specialized in it. But I can tell you the first job I got, because I like to just talk about some stories. The first job I got was a system administrator for this small company in Westminster called PSA Security. And I was there. It was my first IT job. And I remember one of my jobs every night was to get the tape backup. I walked into the server room, put in my backup, hit the backup button, grabbed the tape, switched them around, and I was the tape guy. There was only 2 IT guys, so I was the tape guy, and I brought it home every night. So, and of course, now we've evolved. It's not that anymore, but that's my story of we backed up data back then. You should absolutely still be backing up now. There are vendors, of course, that specialize this. There's a few vendors that have really taken over this space. And again, it's still one of those where it's also built in now with a lot of our infrastructure that we're building out in our cloud products. Okay, so that's data protection from a high level. Now let's focus on DLP, right? So when I'm talking about DLP, I'm going to be talking about data loss prevention. And really, this is just a set of technologies that was built to help protect sensitive data and confidential data from being shared, stolen, accessed in unauthorized ways, really anything that had to do with sensitive data and it going out through sanctioned ways and channels. It is a tool to help prevent that from happening, or at least alerting you and letting you know it happened. DLP can also help you identify and classify data. And then also DLP was a big driver and still is a big driver from a compliance standpoint. So think about if you've got HIPAA or ITAR or PCI, those were a lot of drivers. Those regulations actually forced organizations to have a DLP tool, and they still require that. If you go through a PCI audit nowadays, you're going to still have to have a DLP tool scanning your infrastructure to know where your credit cards are stored. So that's what DLP is from a high level. But let's look at this in a different way. Let's actually pull up a diagram here. So I'm going to talk about really 3 areas of DLP today. I'm going to talk about endpoint, discovery, and network. And then the other one that I still highlight in here because it's still absolutely relevant is email DLP. So really at the middle of this diagram, think of it as the 4 primary channels of DLP protection that are out there. Email is interesting because email has been pretty much taken over by Microsoft. When you buy even an E3 license, and maybe even just the basic E1 license now, maybe not, probably E3. I've got someone shaking their head. No, it's at least got to be E3. E5, I know you get a lot more, but E3 at least gets you something, right? Some basic email DLP for sure. And And what's interesting about that is just because it's so built in with Microsoft, we don't see a lot of third-party vendors out there. We still see some, like, you know, your proof points that have been out there before, Mimecast. But where I've seen email really transform hasn't been around DLP, right? This has been pretty much commoditized. But the other three here, network, discovery, and endpoint, this is where we've really seen most of the transformation take place. And this is what we're going to focus on today. And the reason that we've seen so much transformation take place is because really, if you think about what I've shown here, up at the very top is our sanctioned data storage. Sanctioned data storage was the primary place that we had data back in the day, and it wasn't necessarily anywhere except for our corporate data centers. But then all of a sudden, we started adding in SaaS applications. We started adding in cloud storage. So we've added in additional locations that data is now stored. Plus, it is super easy for people to now move data to unsanctioned cloud storage. So think of just general web pages, personal SaaS applications, personal unmanaged cloud storage. It is so easy nowadays to be on, if you're a Google shop, which we are here at the company I work for, the past company, Palo Alto Networks was as well. It was so easy for me to switch from my personal Gmail to my corporate, right? It was literally just a click of a button, and I'm in between my two accounts in the same browser tab even, right? So it has been, it's very easy, and Microsoft is even making it pretty easy nowadays too. I've seen OneDrive where they've added, now you can switch between your personal and corporate pretty quickly as well. So it's easier nowadays for users to move data to their personal locations. And so we need to make sure that we can see that and watch that. And then we've also seen some other things pop into play, right? End-to-end encrypted chat, like applications. Think about things like WeChat, Signal, even like some things like Proton and some other protocols and third-party applications you can install that have end-to-end encryption. Other things that are interesting. And so those are what we're going to focus on here. I had a question on the diagram. I'm going to pause and see what you had. You can take a photo. Yeah, so there's a question if you could take a photo. You guys can take photos, screenshots. I'll share these slides with you afterwards so you can have the, you know, high res version of it. But yeah, you can take screenshots, all good. Yep. Okay. So let's dive into this, right? So where we're going to start is discovery. And discovery started back in the day with DLP data discovery. This was really the foundation of what started DLP from a discovery standpoint. Was you went and bought a DLP product, and the first thing you did is you started scanning all your storage. You wanted to know where all of your sensitive data was. And the goal is that you would get a treasure map, and it'd show you like, okay, you've got 50 different file servers, and here's where all your sensitive data is stored. And some of them even had the capability to say like, okay, I found the sensitive data over here. It's not supposed to be there. Let's move it and take it and put it in the correct location. So it had like quarantine capabilities. And then also you had to, you know, crawl all the data, which was interesting. I have a great story about this. When we were doing implementations, there was a large media company that paid us to do a big data discovery project for them. Back in the day, you needed a server to do this, right? So we built an appliance. It was literally a Dell server that I put VMware on and put 4 servers on, just Windows servers, super basic. We called it an appliance. It wasn't an appliance, but you know, you sell what you can, right? And anyway, like this company, they had cruise ships, and these cruise ships actually had file servers. They had a server rack on their cruise ships. So when they came into port, they would have our appliance on hand, and they drop it into the cruise ship, so that we could start scanning all the storage on these cruise ships as they were going in and out of ports. And that was like literally a project. And times have changed, of course, but that's just an example of what data discovery was. They needed to know this media company was actually going through a PCI audit issue. So they had to prove that they scanned all the data on their cruise ships to make sure they didn't have credit card data sitting out on the cruise ships. They did. They definitely had credit card data out there, because, you know, it was just easy for them to like take pictures and stuff of credit cards and put them on there. So when we found them, we had to remediate them. We had to rip them off those servers and put them in the correct location. What level? The question, what level do you keep the server in the boat? I don't know. I wasn't on the boats doing the installs. I just knew I just got the ping of it happened. Another funny story though is I did a project for another company, and I don't know why, but they flew me around the world to install Linux on, again, a Symantec DLP appliance and put on application on that. Don't know why, but I flew to Hong Kong, Australia, and San Francisco in a matter of 7 days. I don't know why I tortured myself with that project, but I signed up for it and I did it. I installed Linux, installed an application, and moved on to the next location. So yeah, I don't know. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so what you'll see as I talk about these slides, I'm going to talk about what the product was, and then I'm going to talk about who were the vendors, who came up with these products, right? And then I'm going to talk about what innovation looks like and who the new vendors are, who are the new players in this space. So really the players that came up with DLP data discovery was a company called Varonis. You'll see Varonis throughout these slides when I'm talking about discovery because they're still in this space. They're actually now publicly traded and they're still very relevant. We have WebSense, which is now ForcePoint. We have McAfee, which is now Trellix. We have Symantec, which is now Broadcom. And we have Digital Guardian, which is now Fortran. You can see there's been some acquisitions, as you can tell, right? And if you recognize some of the acquisitions like Broadcom, nothing against them, but they like to buy products and kind of milk the money about them. So, these were the vendors that really, conquered the space. There was another aspect of this, though. It wasn't all about discovery. There was also an element that was going on and still going on around data classification. The data classification was interesting because it was essentially a tool that allowed you to go find sensitive data, but then also put some sort of label on it. And the reason this has been around so long is think about government and military. They've been labeling documents for so long, right? There was that leak not too long ago, about 6 months ago, some guy put a bunch of files on Discord. If you ever looked at the files, I saw a few screenshots of those files. They had a bunch of acronyms at the top of the page, like TS and I don't know, level 1, level 2, and whatever, right? All these little acronyms at the top of the page. That's the government's data classification tool. It labels all their documents with a label of essentially the sensitivity of that document. So these tools can be automated where they automatically put the label on. There's also manual classification. So like you're building a document and it tells you like, hey, what sensitivity level should this document be? And then there's hybrid, pretty much just a combination of both, where someone could be like, yeah, this is public data. And then the classification tool scans it and says, oh, wait a second. This is clearly not public data. It talks about missiles and top secret data. Let's actually put that in top secret, right? So that's the data classification. So who really came up with data classification? Varonis was, again, one of the big vendors. There was two other ones that were big, Titus and Bolton James. Interesting enough, both those vendors got acquired by the same company. I don't know why they bought two data classification tools, but they did. And they're now Fortran. And then the biggest one here, and still the biggest one, is Microsoft. And the reason that Microsoft is so big in this space is just because when you're creating an Office document, it just makes sense for them to be the labeling tool that is tied in when you're building it, right? And Microsoft is still so far, they're all over the place, right? I mean, when you're working in Office 365, it just makes sense that that's where they put the labeling. Interesting enough, Microsoft cannot come up with a name that they want to stick with for this product. They've called it Azure Information Protection, Microsoft Information Protection, and now it's called PureView. I don't know why, because interesting enough, there was a product by that I keep on confusing called SureView that was a ForcePoint product, a WebSense project. So I get confused all over the place. I can never keep the name straight. But Microsoft is a big player in this space. Yeah.
From Nick, does Google Workspace have a DLP feature?
They do. I've seen Google Workspace have a labeling tool. So they've got like a data classification tool in Google Workspace, and then they do have a data discovery tool built in. What's interesting about the Microsofts, the Googles, even like Dropbox and Box, they have their own too. they're really limited to the app that they're in, meaning like you can't go and you can't use the Google labels anywhere else but Google, right? So you're kind of stuck in that platform with data classification. So good question there, but yes, they do have something. So really what happened with data discovery is that there was three things that happened that really started causing a bunch of innovation in the space, just literally in the last 3 to 5 years. So one has been the migration from on-prem to cloud and SaaS, right? I think that it's been happening for a while, right? The big consulting companies call it your digital transformation. And I feel like they've been going on for 10, 15 years now, but it really, in my mind, accelerated, especially when we had COVID and people just were working remote, is people just started innovating. Plus, we've seen application development, all new developers, I feel like now that are coming out of school and coming out of, the new boot camps and everything. They don't focus on building servers and infrastructure anymore, right? They learn how to develop in the cloud, either serverless or Kubernetes or container based. They don't know on-prem anymore, right? So everything had to essentially evolve, and so much of modern day development of applications is all up in the cloud. Some other things that are interesting is compliance has changed a little bit. Things like GDPR, states now have, compliance regulatory requirements. So now we have things like the right to be forgotten, and users that can say like, hey, I want to know all the data that you've collected on me, right? So now you have to have tools that it can actually meet those requirements, right? If someone says like, hey, what data did you collect on me? You have to have the ability to go and scan all of your different apps to then build a report then to that user to tell them, yeah, here's every place I have your data, right?
How many levels of data classification commonly used?
In the government, I think that it's very high. But most organizations, I usually see like anywhere between 5 is the most common. I've worked with some government contract companies that I've seen that have a little bit more, but usually you see something like public, and then you go into different levels of sensitivity, like secret, top secret. I've also seen then internal only, and then I've even seen some where it's like internal only with some sort of secret tag on it, like exec only, or even like clearance. Like if you're in a government contractor, you may have like internal, and then internal should have like maybe only people that have top security clearance, right? So then you would have like internal TS, internal, secret, whatever it is. So I would say usually it's around there. Now I have seen some organizations. There's a big manufacturing company that I know out in Idaho that they have literally, I think, like 20 different tags. So I mean, you can get wild with it, or you can be pretty simple with it. I think if you're going to get wild with it, you better have automation built into it. You better not have a user have to go through a list of 20 different classifications to pick the right one. They're just not going to do it correctly. They're going to mess up all the time. If you want your users to do it, it better be simple. 4 to 5 is what I would say. If you're going to have automation, then sure, go wild, go crazy, put as many in there as you want. Yeah. Okay, so these were the drivers. Oh, and the last driver for innovation, access and settings. Salesforce alone has like 100 different configuration settings that you can turn on and off in that platform. Just Salesforce alone. Imagine how many SaaS applications that you have. Imagine how many different settings are in all of those, and how many different ways you could flip one switch and now that SaaS application just became unsecured. Also, the same thing with cloud apps, right? When you're building in AWS, the access control in there, it can get very complex, right? So that's another big driver here. So really where we've seen the innovation come in, and there's been a few different names for this. I don't have the great name. I'm not a namer. I'm not a marketing guy. I've just been calling them data discovery platforms. But really what you've got in these new platforms is they're combining a bunch of applications together. Oh, that's my computer complaining about power. Well, sorry, everyone. I gotta find some power. I don't know if I'll, oh, I got an extension in here, maybe. Quick timeout, sorry.
Is it, this PC?
Yeah, I think I can get,
Power strip right there too.
okay. I don't want to lose my battery. See if we can make it. It's built in.
Fire marshals are different. than
Yeah.
Firemen. Firemen like putting out fire.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So data discovery platform. So essentially they're combining a bunch of products together. So you've got DLP data discovery. We talked about that. We've got data classification. We talked about that. We also have some other new things that have came out, things like data hygiene. So making sure you're not holding on to data for too long. Data risk assessments, getting an understanding of like, okay, I've got this SaaS application. Is my data at risk because this is maybe a risky vendor, or maybe I've got settings incorrect. Data privacy, that's what I was talking about. You know, if someone asks for the right to be forgotten. We also have data governance. And then we also have posture management. So really you're combining a ton of different features and products into a single platform. Gartner's called has a new acronym for us all to learn, and you can learn it or you don't have to, but I know it because I live in this space. It's DSPM is the new acronym, Data Security Posture Management. It's one of the acronyms I'm not like thrilled about because it's literally talking about a single feature, but they pretty much have said like a DSPM should include DLP, data governance, and data posture management, data mapping, data lineage should have all these features in it, even though the name literally says posture management, just one thing. So I don't know, I'm not sold on the name, but whatever, I'm not paid for that, Gartner is. So what's interesting is Gartner has said that 20% of organizations will have a DSPM solution in 2 years from now. So there is growth in that area. And then a lot of people tell me like, well, Brian, is this area like got a lot of vendors? Is it crazy? Yeah, it's a little crazy. So there's a lot of vendors in this space. This is my vendor slide of all the new innovative vendors in this space. It's a little bit busy. We have some acquisition activity already taking place. One just recently, Dig Securities getting acquired by Palo Alto Networks. That was announced just last month. You've got a few other ones in here like Polar getting acquired by IBM and Lermer getting acquired by Rubrik. So you definitely got some acquisition going on. You also have some other players in here like Varonis. That was one of the big players I talked about. They're playing in this space. You have some others that are, you know, focused on like cloud security, like Wiz. They're getting into this space. And then you have some big vendors in this space. And a lot of people say, well, is this just like a fad? Is this going to stick around or is this going to go away? Well, one of the things I look at when I'm doing research in these areas is I look at the funding. And the reason I like to look at funding is it gives me an indication of like, okay, are there well-funded vendors here? Is it just like, small startups, Series A type vendors? And really, we're seeing quite a bit of funding in this area. So some of the pure play vendors like Big ID, they've got 246 million of total funding. They raised a Series C or Series D of 30 million. We have Cyera, which just last year raised 100 million Series B. That's a massive Series B round for the data security space. You have some others like Dig, which just got acquired, Security AI. So you've got quite a bit of funding in here. And then the one public company we have is Varonis. They're sitting at about a $3 billion market cap. So while I think that there's going to be more acquisitions, you'll probably see maybe a few of the pure play vendors like come out on top. So I do think we'll see some more acquisition taking place in this space, but I don't think it's going anywhere. I think that DSPM, and if it gets rebranded to something else, I think that this is absolutely going to be a relevant space, mainly because I don't see us ever going back on-prem. I don't see us going to our organization and telling them like, yeah, you can't use those SaaS apps anymore, right? They're going to throw a fit. They're just going to say, there's no way. There's no way I'm going to give up all my SaaS apps, all of these cool things that I've learned to love. And so I just don't see that happening. So I think that this space is just going to be here, and there's not much we can do about it, right? So that's data discovery. Any questions before I move on? I like to just see if there's any questions on each area that I'm talking about before I move on. Because I can check the chat.
Recap on what Series A through D means?
Oh yeah, good question there. So essentially when we go through funding, and you'll see this on the other slides, is when a company is private, you'll have what we call series, and these are usually series of fundings. So at the very beginning, you usually hear it called a seed round. A seed round is essentially like your first investment of outside investors. There's many different people that could invest in the company. Typically, we see on almost all of these, I think that they're all funded by venture capitalists, so VC firms. There's also PE firms, private equity, that we'll see usually acquire like big companies that either were public and they're going to make them private again, or they're, well down the line of maybe like Series F or something like that. So essentially you go seed, Series A, B, C, D, E, F. I mean, you could go, I don't even know how many levels you could do. I've seen Series F before. I don't know how much you go beyond that. And then typically what you would see, it's been a little bit slowed in cybersecurity just overall, is typically what we'd see is we'd see organizations usually would get to around 100 million ARR, and ARR is annual recurring revenue. So that's like the new metric that everyone uses. We don't use just revenue because we're all SaaS companies. So we essentially, all of us, when you buy a product, you're not buying it, you're buying a subscription now. And every year they measure how much revenue we have on those subscriptions. So annual, it's recurring every year. When companies used to get to $100 million, they used to go public. That was about 3 years ago. Now that bar is so much more higher. It's about 250 million now before you go public. And even then the scrutiny on those companies is so high that we're seeing more likely that's going to be acquisition right now. So that's kind of the market it is in. That could be a topic on itself, and we could find some VC guy that could probably talk circles around me, but that's a little bit of an overview. Okay, so let's talk about endpoint. Endpoint's interesting. Endpoint DLP was really just built to help protect data down at the endpoint. You want to know what the biggest driver of endpoint DLP was? USB drives. Any of you guys have any USB drives still sitting around? I know I do. I don't know what to do with them. Like, do you throw them away? Like, I feel bad throwing them away. Like, what if I ever need this thing again? Meanwhile, I pay for like 2 terabytes of cloud storage. Like, why do I still have these? I don't know, but I just do. Some sort of weird attachment I have to a silly USB drive, but it is what it is. Yeah, there you go. Booting my old school laptop. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Smash it with a hammer is what you recommend? Okay. Oh, nice. Yeah. I've always wanted a microwave one. But that was literally the driver. There was another one too, actually. CD DVD was another one that was big in the day. People were burning to their DVD drives, like sensitive data. And people were just like, had no idea, like, what's going on these USB drives? What's going on the DVDs? We don't know. So literally endpoint DLP was built to solve that problem. Like, it was built to say, like, we need to know what data you're putting on those. And so that's what it built. And then it just started growing, right? Started saying like, okay, what about network shares? What about going into the browsers? What about FTP? What about cloud storage? So just as new technologies, new transfer mechanisms came out, the DLP vendors just started adding those in, right? So it just kept on growing and growing. And really the point, I should also mention, the place that you typically install the DLP endpoint agent is on your desktop. So they're usually running on your Mac or your Windows laptop or your desktop or your virtual desktop infrastructure. That's where you usually install the agent. Okay, so who were our traditional vendors? Well, we've got 4 of them that were the DLP discovery vendors. 4 of them are here again. We have WebSense, Symantec, McAfee, and Digital Guardian. Those 4, you're going to see them again in my presentation because they were what we called enterprise DLP. And they had essentially all 4 vectors of data protection covered. They had discovery, endpoint, network, and email. So they had all 4. But in my mind, enterprise DLP is kind of the thing of the past because our enterprise does not look anything like it did 10 years ago. It just doesn't. It's broken up. We don't have the same infrastructure. So you're probably not going to have one vendor that does it all anymore. You're probably going to have multiple vendors or a large platform play like a Palo, and we can talk about them. There's also 2 other vendors, GPT Technologies and Endpoint Protector by CoSysS. Those were our traditional ones. So DLP Endpoint came out. That was version 1. There were some complaints. The biggest complaint was it kind of slowed down your machine. They did content inspection locally. So it was actually CPU and memory intensive. There was also like some other funny things that vendors would do, like they would try to decrypt traffic locally to get visibility into the web browsers. There was just different things that they did that caused impact to the end user. And they worked for a while, but then people started saying like, it's too heavy. We want a lightweight agent. So a new thing came out called Insider Risk Management, IRM. And these were lightweight agents. They typically didn't have blocking capabilities. Version 1 didn't, at least. But their whole thing was just like lightweight, just look at all data movement, and we'll look for risky behavior based on anomaly detection. If someone all of a sudden moves a bunch of files to USB, we'll just consider that it's risky. We don't need to inspect those files. But that was the approach, right? And this actually did take off. Some of the big Fortune 1000s that I talked to, most of them now actually have an insider risk management team. So they have a team that's their whole job, is insider risk. And they like these tools. They want to have these tools. So some of the first vendors to this space was WebSense. We had Observe IT that was purchased by Proofpoint. And then we also had Code 42. Those were really the 3 vendors that really got to this space first. So then what happened? Well, in the last 3 to 5 years, we've really had 3 things that have happened in my mind that have really caused innovation to happen in this space. One is we've had platform diversity. So back, even just 5 years ago, I feel like the Mac OS population, it wasn't that high. Really nowadays, it is all over the place. I talked to a lot of large organizations that are like, yeah, we've got, 50% Mac OS now. Or if they're still are saying, yeah, we've only got 5%, you ask them, well, what's it look like in the next, year or two? And it's like, well, everyone wants a Mac. So we have to grow that space because it just is, right? And so we have a new diversity on that. More people are using Mac. We also see some Linux coming in, right? Some developers want to use Linux, right? It's just it's what they learned on. It's what they want to keep using. VDI infrastructure is out there. And then, of course, Windows, it's still in play, right? It's never going to go away, but it's out there. SaaS and cloud application was another thing that happened, right? USB drives went away. It just did, right? No one wanted to carry around a terabyte drive anymore. They were like, it's just easier for me to go buy my $9 a month subscription to Google Drive or Dropbox. I'm still a Dropbox user. I feel like I'm never going to get away from them, but I am. I'm a Dropbox user. I've got my terabyte up there. And that's, everyone's got cloud storage now, right? Personal and corporate, right? So all users are in the cloud now. And then work from home. I think that work from home is more recent. I mean, 2020 is really when the big push happened, right? And now we had to say like, okay, well, what are people doing when they're at home? We need to get an understanding of what data they're interacting with. And now we, maybe not have as much strict controls. So we're either let them bring their own device or, what are the different impacts there? So really we've seen, and time check. Okay. So we've seen now the innovation take place is really what I've seen is now endpoint DLP and insider risk management have now come together. So now we have a single agent for both of those two solutions. IRM products have now added in blocking capabilities. We see terms, so Gartner hasn't coined a term for these products yet, but I've seen the vendors kind of have come up with their own terms, things like people-centric DLP and human-centric and data detection and response, next-gen DLP. So those are kind of the terms you might hear out there. Another feature that we've seen is data lineage and full data movement visibility. This is important, especially when you're doing insider risk management. You want to just know everything that a user's done, right? Because if you're doing an investigation, you want to know anything and everything and all data that they've touched, because you may have had a classification level wrong on something, and you may need to go back and look at that. So you want to have full understanding of all data activity. Data lineage is an example of that, and I've got one more slide where I'll show that. And then the last one I'll mention and why you may want to have a DLP endpoint is end-to-end encrypted apps are here to stay. They're not going to go away, right? Things like Signal, WeChat, those, if you're allowing your users to install that client on their workstation, you're not going to be able to decrypt that at the network layer. If you try, it's just going to break the app. So that's another reason why endpoint DLP has made a comeback. Okay. You would be surprised how many global organizations allow their, it's like the organizations that we work with that are in APAC especially, it's almost like a standard to allow their users to use WeChat. And because of that, they're using it for personal and corporate. So you better know all the data that's going in there, right? Yeah, absolutely. So it's surprising how often you see it being utilized. Okay, so one example of data lineage, and I'll talk about the vendors. I like to pull this up because a lot of people say like, what do you mean they're going to capture all activity of data movement? Well, here's an example of data lineage. It's an example just showing, okay, if we have a user, let's say Allison, that downloads a report from Workday, you could then say like, okay, any data that comes from our corporate Workday should be considered sensitive. And then you can follow that through its whole life cycle. So if Allison emails it to two of her colleagues, Charles and Jennifer, and then Charles moves it up to Google Drive, and then another user, or two users download it from Google Drive, and then one of them, Shiva, uploads it to WeChat. Well, at that point, you may want to know that happened, right? But if it changes along the way, maybe someone encrypts it or zips it up, or they change the file, you want to follow it through its whole life cycle. And you want to know that it came from Workday is where it originated from. And then if someone does move it to WeChat, you may want to stop that from happening, right? Someone's uploading the full employee database up into WeChat. You know what? You may want to put a block in there, right? So this is an example of why you would want to have full visibility into all data movement. Okay, so who are our vendors, right? We've got a company I work for, Cyberhaven. This is the space that we play in. So that's the company I work for now. We also have some of the vendors that I showed that really started this space. They're still in here, right? So you've got Code 42. You have Proofpoint, which I showed you was Observe IT. That's now completely Proofpoint. We have another one called Detext. Endpoint Protector still in here. Another big one that I have to call out, of course, is Microsoft. I don't know if you know this, but in Windows 11, by default, you have the Microsoft DLP agent installed. It's just there. It's ready to go. It doesn't work until you put an E5 license on it, but it's there. It's just installed. That's how Microsoft is starting to try to get their grip into this space. They're just saying it's installed. Like we're putting it out there. It's just baked in right out of the gate. And another one is Next DLP. So again, is this space, is it as crowded? No, it's definitely not as crowded as DSPM. Why is that? Well, it's a little bit harder to do when you think about it, right? So a DSPM, really the way that they tie into the applications to get visibility is through APIs. So they go and scan your SaaS application and your cloud infrastructure using API connections. Well, to build an API connection is a little bit easier than it is to build a DLP endpoint agent. So that's why this space just doesn't have as many vendors. And the vendors that you do see may have been around for a while and they've just been keeping up with the pace, right? And the funding again isn't quite as large, and there isn't quite as many in here. The one I do like to call out though is Microsoft. And I didn't actually know this. I searched this, and I don't know how many months ago this was. I didn't know this. They had almost a $2.5 trillion market cap. Like, no wonder they are putting they're just want to spread out to anywhere, right? They got to keep growing. Like, that is a lot of money they already have, and they got to squeeze a little bit more out of each of us, right? Okay. So last one. I just saw we got 10 minutes, so I'll try to keep moving here. So the next one is network. Let's talk about network. So what was network? When did it start? Well, we started with web proxies. Anyone remember web proxies? I used to install a few web proxies, and I tried to avoid those projects as much as possible because it wasn't fun. It was hard. I installed WebSense. They had this one called the V10K, and then Blue Coat. Blue Coat was the other big one. I did installs of both of those. Ooh, that was a challenge, man. SSL decryption is not fun. If any of you are network admins, I feel bad if you still are dealing with that. I don't want to do that ever again. But essentially the way we had to do it, we had to put a web proxy in place. We had to decrypt all the traffic, and then we ported that over to DLP using a protocol called ICAP. It was just a communication protocol, and it allowed us to then inspect that traffic, HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP traffic, to see if there was any sensitive data going out through those channels. And then we also had email gateways. So back in the day, we all had on-prem Exchange servers, right? So we needed to check what email data was going out. So we would install MTAs in line. So go from our on-prem Exchange server to an MTA. The MTA would inspect the traffic, and they would tell us, yeah, this has got DLP data in it, so let's encrypt that, or let's do something with it, right? So that it was all that's how we built it, right? That was the flow back in the day. Okay, so who were the vendors there, right? We had Proofpoint, email vendor, right? And then we had the four big players that we've already talked about. We had WebSense, Symantec, McAfee, and Digital Guardian playing in this space. And then we had GTP Technologies, and then we had Fidelis. Fidelis was a network vendor. So what happened? What happened, right? I'll tell you what happened. We all require faster bandwidth. There's no way that I want to VPN back to my HQ and then go through a web proxy and then wait for something to happen for me to then get out. That's just not going to happen anymore, right? So now we're all working remotely. We're working from home, working hybrid. We all have faster bandwidth now, so we have to have a lot more throughput on our applications in order to do inspection. And then just data is no longer just on-prem, it's cloud SaaS. We've already talked about that. Yada yada. Okay, so what's been the innovation? I'm sure you've heard some of these acronyms. There's two of them, and I forgot to put the other one in here. One of them is called SSE, Security Service Edge. The other acronym that you'll hear in this area is called SASE. And SASE is essentially just a combination of SSE plus SD-WAN. So SASE is essentially a combination of both of those. And what SSE is a combination of multiple products. So it's zero trust, it's cloud web gateways, it's cloud, it's CASB, it's firewall as a service, and it's network DLP. So they bundled this all into a giant platform, right? Pretty complex. And the reason it's complex is because the vendors that now sit in this space are massive, right? In order to go do SASE, you have to deploy a global network that can handle millions of concurrent users. The throughput has just got to be massive, right? And then you've got to do things that aren't just your standard DLP. You're not just going to do DLP anymore, right? Now you got to do malware, URL inspection, 0 day. Like, you've got so much more that you have to do in these platforms than just DLP. So the vendors that really sit in this space are pretty big, right? You've got Palo Alto Networks, which is the biggest pure play cybersecurity vendor out there, right? You've got ForcePoint, you've got Fortinet, SkyHigh, Zscaler, Netscope, iBoss. When I go to the funding here, you'll see we're on a different scale now all of a sudden, right? And the reason we're on a different scale is because these are platforms. These are no longer just data protection solutions. Data protection is just a small part of their product suite, right? So you've got ForcePoint that was acquired recently for 1.5 billion by Francisco Partners. You've got Fortinet at a 44 billion market cap. You've got Palo at a 74 billion market cap, Zscaler at 22 billion. This is a lot of money. So yeah, I'm not showing you any startup that's coming in here that's going to create a network DLP solution, right? Because it's just not going to happen, right? These solutions are now part of a platform. So if you already have one of these products, so let's say you've already said like, okay, I have to get rid of my blue coat proxies. If you still have them, wow, congratulations, you're an amazing person. But if you're like, okay, I'm done with them, I'm moving to SASE. Just know, like when you're looking at these vendors, consider making sure that you look at their DLP solution just to make sure that it meets the needs that you had before, because some of them are a little bit better than others. That's all I'm going to say. I worked for one of these vendors, and these vendors are network security vendors, right? DLP is just a small portion of their business. So some of them do it better than others. Okay. So let's talk email. I kind of already talked about email. It's kind of been commoditized. Microsoft has things built in, right? Even things like labeling is built into Outlook. So let's wrap this up. I've got about 3 minutes left. I was going to talk about CASB, but I'm going to skip this slide. I just want to talk about deployment, and then we'll wrap up. So when we talk about deployment, if you've never worked on a DLP or data protection project, and you're like, I don't even know where to begin, here's something you could utilize. It's called the Data Security Maturity Model. It's essentially just think of NIST, but for data. There's some stuff that's cool in here. If you already have NIST, you don't need this. But if you also just want to look at some framework that's all around data protection, good framework to reference. It can be interesting. I like some of the aspects of it that just talk about like the very narrow use cases can be interesting, right? And this is also something that they talk about right out of the gate in that is just defining your program goals, understanding what data you actually care about. Like, don't go buy DLP because you think you need to protect PII data when really you don't care about PII data when you're building, the next generation widget. Like, why did you buy DLP for PII? You're building widgets, right? Like, make sure you understand why you actually would buy that solution. And it should be driven by the business, not just, I bought DLP add-on, right? That shouldn't be the driver anymore. So what was the approach? And this is where I'll finish. There's 2 more slides. This is it. So deployment, how did we used to do it? We used to start it in very linear direction. When I was a consultant, we always worked in this direction. I always did discovery first, deploy DLP discovery first. Why? It was easy and it took forever to do my scans. When I talk about those cruise trips, that was a 1-year project. It took us a year to scan all that data, and they were paying us consulting fees for that whole time, right? Great for us, not great for them. But we always started there. It was the easiest to get started and start working there. And then we would move to network. Network was a little harder, right? I had to do MTAs in line. I had to work with the proxy team to get ICAP set up. But it was, once I got that done, I was in production. It was off to the races. Last one I would do, endpoint. Ooh, I did not like doing endpoint. I'm hoping that the hours of the project were almost out. Maybe you just got a few hours left. I'm going to install one agent and I'm out of there because I don't want to hear all the complaints from your end users about me putting my agent on there and it can't move all your files to your USB drive anymore. So that's the way we used to go, right? The agents were heavy, if you remember me talking about that, right? So that's the way we always deployed it, right? What's the new approach? Well, you need to understand why you would want to deploy one of these tools at the very get-go, right? If you came to me and said, hey, Brian, I got like 50 different SaaS applications and I have no idea what's going on in them, well, go buy a DSPM, or at least look at a DSPM, right? It can help you get an understanding what data's out there. It can help you get an understanding of if your settings on all those SaaS applications is correctly. It could help with your access control. That's probably where I'd start. Or if you came to me and said, like, Brian, I'm building this new widget. It's going to change the world. Okay, what are your users doing to build it? oh, they're using CAD and they're using, InDesign and they're building it down on their laptops. Oh, well, put a DLP agent on there. Let's get closest to that data as we can as your users are building it and make sure that they're not sharing it with your competitors. Or if you come to me and say like, and we just bought Prisma Access from Palo and I need DLP, I'd say, well, you don't have a choice. You're going to buy Palo's DLP, right? So it just depends on where you're at in your cycle and currently, what your needs are. And it's more based on their risk assessment and understanding what your organization needs and what data you're trying to protect. And if a consultant comes to you and says like, you've got to do it in this order, I don't know. I would tell them, let's step back and do a risk assessment first before we just start deploying in our traditional method, right? Okay. So that's it. I know I went 3 minutes over. I do appreciate everyone's time. I did have a few things for everyone on Zoom. I was going to give away headphones. So if you guys want some headphones into the raffle, and everyone here, you could just write your name on a raffle ticket and I'll just do it after I get everyone's name and then I'll get your address of the winner and I'll send you some headphones. They're sitting at home. I live in Grand Junction. I used to live here in Denver. I moved to Grand Junction. That's where I'm from. They're sitting in my office right now. So clearly I can't get them. I'll ship them to you. I think they're skull candies. They're like over there skull candies. They're like $100. So they're not like amazing, but they're also not total cheapness. Just a name and an email address if you want to be in that raffle. Okay. And then anyone that's here, I don't have a lot to give away. I have one leftover sweater. If you want an XL sweater, this thing's amazing. You guys can fight over it, rock, paper, scissors, whatever you need to do. And I do appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for having me.
So this is where we follow you on LinkedIn.
Sure, yeah. Follow me.